I am very pleased to welcome you to tonight's program, Between Spiritual Ideals and Material Realities, Wen Ma on Art and Community. I have a few directory things I need to always say before we introduce the program, which is number one, to acknowledge the exhibition we're sitting in and among. This is Damon Melanson, As Any Means Are Necessary. It's on view through December 7th. If you haven't seen it, spend your $0, come back, see it, bring a friend. I also would be a terrible director if I did not plug our 40th anniversary fundraiser, Art in Motion, which takes place October 26th. Wen Ma, another artist in the audience, Linda Fantuzzo, other artists, Camila Guevara, are participating in the event. There are cards up front. You can scan the QR, buy your ticket. Make sure that free events like this, that art like this keeps happening, keeps coming to Charleston. And tonight, with Wen Ma. Jennifer has a long history with Charleston, as she's going to tell you about this evening. And the Halsey Institute is very proud to have played a role in this history. Jennifer exhibited here in spring 2019 with an exhibition, Cry Joy Park, Gardens of Dark and Light, where if you remember it, she completely transformed the space. Jennifer and I were passing ships in the night at that time. I was a curator here at the Halsey. I was leaving for maternity leave as she arrived for install, and I brought my 2-week-old daughter here to the Halsey Institute. It was her first outing in the world was actually Jennifer's world. And I know how much effort, blood, sweat, tears, time went into that install of that exhibition, and I got to experience it as a visitor did. I left, it was an empty gallery. I came in, it was another world. And that's very rare that a curator gets to do that in their own space, and I was amazed at how it was transformed. It lives large in our memories, and I know it lives large in yours as well. Tonight's program is co-presented with the Foundation for Spirituality and the Arts. Jennifer was going to give what I know is a fabulous talk, followed by a short conversation with myself and Tyler Rollins, Executive Director of the FSA, and then we'll open it up for your curious minds and their questions. So for now, to introduce Jennifer, I'm very pleased to introduce the FSA's Executive Director, Tyler Rollins.
All right, thank you, Katie, for having us. I just want to say a couple words about FSA and sort of why we're here and why we are so pleased to have Jennifer with us. So just about 4 years ago, I started this organization as a way of really just nurturing the interconnections between spirituality and the arts, particularly the visual arts, but really going across the spectrum because they're all interconnected. As we all know, art is conceived from many intentionalities and many kind of psychological states, one of which is this sort of a spirit of openness, a sense of interconnectivity, a sense of one is transmitting something from beyond oneself and communicating that to others in a kind of open-ended spirit. These are the kind of artists that we particularly value working with. Because really this is also the kind of orientation that people have in a spiritual context as well, the sense of connecting with something beyond the self, transmitting that also with this sense of openness, which is a creative process as well. So this interconnectivity between creativity and spirituality informs many artists' work. In some cases, it's very explicit, and others, it's something bubbling under the surface. So tonight, I think we're very privileged to hear from Jennifer just some of her thoughts on the evolution of her work, and also through these wonderful connections with Charleston. The amazing show here, which I hear is one of the most popular in recent years at the Halsey. And then many of you might remember that she also conceived and designed and directed the installation opera Paradise Interrupted, which had its world premiere here in Charleston at Spoleto Festival in 2015, and was also performed around the world, including at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Lincoln Center Festival, also the Singapore International Arts Festival. Jennifer's work was particularly seen and awarded from receiving an Emmy Award for her work with the Beijing Olympics opening and closing ceremonies in 2008. She's also shown with international institutions such as the Guggenheim in Bilbao, the National Art Museum of China, the Ulan Center in Beijing, the Vancouver Art Gallery, the Qatar Museums, as well as many American museums such as the Metropolitan, the Guggenheim, the Phillips Collection. She lives and works between New York and Beijing and also teaches in the Master of Fine Arts program at the School of Visual Arts in New York City. Her work can currently be seen in 3 locations around the world. There's an exhibition called Belonging at the Georgetown University Art Galleries in Washington, D.C., exhibition called Untitled Ink Rhythm at the National Arts Center in Tokyo, and A Landscape of Metamorphosis, which is on view in Macau. So I'm very pleased, without going on, which I could for quite a long time, of her many accomplishments and exhibitions. I'll hand it over to Jennifer Wen Ma. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for coming, and thank you Halsey for having me back. It's always such a pleasure to come back to a place that you spend a lot of time, and indeed that project we spent a lot of sweat, at least. Maybe not blood and tears, but a lot of sweat. And many of you participate in that, so thank you. It's great to be back. And also this time with FSA, which really frames this talk in a really interesting way. I'm going to do something a little bit different with this talk. I usually like to pack my talk with like 1 million images and do a lot of projects. This time I'm only going to focus on 3. They're all related to Charleston, and I'll only use 500,000 images. So let's see how it goes. So I'll start with this project, Paradise Interrupted. The project was not conceived in Charleston, but it was born here. To make a long story short, I was interested in opera from a series of projects I had done, and I was talking to a lot of people about how to make opera happen, but I was coming from a very simple perspective. I'm a visual artist. I thought me making a set design for opera would be really riveting. I could make something really new and interesting in contemporary art kind of framework, but everyone was super busy. Everyone said, great idea. People I knew from the Olympics, I have a lot of theater friends. They were like, great, we love that, but nothing got done. So I realized that if you want something done, you have to do it yourself. And not knowing how hard opera was gonna be, I thought, yeah, I'll just do it. So I was very lucky that I had great collaborators. This woman in the middle here, her name is Qian Yi. She is a renowned Kun opera singer, lives in New York, and I met her through a mutual friend. And I was thinking about opera, but I didn't really know how to hinge it on something. You know, it's just more of a, again, abstract idea. But when I met her, she said, so she has a very interesting story of, she was the first generation of Kun opera singers brought up after Cultural Revolution, when this opera form of 400 years uninterrupted in China was interrupted during Cultural Revolution. And so she was the brightest star coming up after in the 80s and 90s. But she performed in the Lincoln Center Festival rendition of the Peony Pavilion, very famous opera. Because she participated in that, she was banned from performing in China, and she still, so that was 1999, so to this day she has not been able to perform. When I met her, and she's in her mid to late 30s, and she said, you know, now that I've been in America for 15, 20 years, and she has studied with Meredith Monk, Peter Sellers, she's worked with international masters, and done movies and plays, and she said, but the greatest art form I realized is my first love, Queen opera. And I just thought, when she said that, I thought, oh, that's my idea for the opera. It's this woman or person in search for something greater than herself, but she finds it in herself in the end. So she returns to where she started, but of course, she's not the same as where she first started. So there's an internal transformation. So, and then she introduced me to the composer, and we're very fortunate that we were able to preview this at the Metropolitan Museum. This is in the Temple of Dendor. We did a preview there. And then we brought it to Spoleto. Many of you already know the Spoleto program, so I won't go on about it, but it's just such a wonderful vehicle for artists to test out new ideas. I was able to have a residency here for 4 weeks. We could workshop. We did all kinds of workshop leading up, but then all of us, the entire company, stayed here. It was 5 singers, 14-piece orchestra, 8 dancers. We got to stay in Charleston. And one thing Spoleto would do is rent these beautiful houses for everyone in the company would stay at. Each one would have a house. We would visit each other. We would have these late night work sessions. And it really got us to get to know Charleston, but I'll come back to that. So about the opera first. So 5 singers. This is Qianyi, the main singer. And then there are 4 male singers. So she sings at a mezzo-soprano range. And we had countertenor, tenor, bass, and bass baritone. So the Western style of singing of the men framed her voice in the middle. And because the Queen opera singing is a very fragile way of singing through the throat, not through the diaphragm, so I thought of this as this East meets West in a formal way, where the 2 traditions came together because the score was brand new. And the idea was based on 2 gardens, visually speaking. The Garden of Eden, I was thinking about Eve, the day after she was kicked out of the Garden of Eden, what kind of regret she might have had, how she might have gone through other ways trying to find and rebuild her paradise, either physically or spiritually and mentally, right? So just in an alternative way. And the other garden I based this on was Peony Pavilion, which I mentioned a little bit earlier about the traditional opera that Qianyi has sang in. And that story is very well known in China, in the East, which is about a young woman, 16 years old. She's never seen the world. She's never been outside of her home. And one day she falls asleep in her back garden, the Peony Pavilion, dreams of a young man that she falls in love with. And they have this very charged, very erotic encounter. She wakes up and finds out that it's all but a dream. And she is so lovesick, she dies. Then the young man's real, sees her portrait later, she has to come back from the dead in order to be reunited with her love. And this is a 20-hour opera in the whole length. So I was thinking, okay, what if this person, this protagonist in my opera, didn't have to die and come back alive, didn't have to go through what Eve went through, like the childbearing, the pain, and all of this. What if there's an alternative way of thinking about this? So it came from, and then also the idea of paradise, right? The word paradise in here interrupted. And I was really following Milton's Paradise Lost as text more than the Bible. But the idea of paradise is based on the Greek word, which is a walled garden. So there's always been this idea of like a boundary. Like Jessalyn and I were talking, I was like, why didn't God just make the whole world Garden of Eden? Why was it just one part? This idea of like, what is a boundary? So it did, to tie in with all the conversation about spirituality, I do want to use that as a through line in that we often use subject matter in contemporary art about culture, about biblical stories or other kinds of religion, culturally referencing, but we don't really talk about that as a practice in our own work. So this is actually a really great opportunity for me to spend some time thinking about it. So I'm just pulling these threads out, so I hope you guys come along on this journey. This is another scene. This is quite animalistic. The 4 men turn into wolves and are very threatening, and the main characters, just basically go through all these trials and tribulations until she figures out what she needs is inside of her. There's a lot of poetic lament. And one moment she does find this very beautiful, so everything is black and white up to this point with a little bit of color here and there. So I use a lot of Chinese landscape painting, literati painting. So the black and white motif is very strong. It's like ink painting, using ink on white paper. But in moments of just pure exhaustion and ecstasy, I use very bright colors in here. So this is a dream sequence. But eventually, the garden that was giving her all these experiences turns to ashes. And the garden, I should have had a little video here, actually opens up through this paper fold, but I can show that a little bit later. So in front of your eyes, the garden folded down to nothing, the ashes come out, and when she comes back on stage, to the empty stage, there's an inkwell in the middle of the stage, and she rises out of this inkwell singing this one last song about now she has what it takes to paint her own world. She no longer needs an external world for her internal needs. So, and as the ink is rising up on her white dress. So I spent on and off, I spent about a year here in Charleston, and then in the end, I had this very intense 4 or 5 weeks making the opera. And the beauty of Charleston really captivated me. And I think that a lot of the idea of the garden and this sacred space and this kind of secretive space really got injected into the project as well, because the house I stayed in had a beautiful garden, and then, like I said earlier, I would go visit other people's in my company, and they all had beautiful, large or small little gardens, and then visiting the plantations and all of that. So there's just a lot of this, like the holy city, the beautiful Charleston, very cultivated, definitely seeped into me and into this project. At the same time, there was something kind of odd that I couldn't figure out, that kind of was a little bit uncomfortable in the back of my mind, but I was so busy making this opera, it was very difficult, because I never made an opera before, I never directed before, so all my energy was making it. I didn't have time to deal with the discomfort that I felt in the back of my mind, So a few years later, when I started having a conversation with Halsey again, and they said, would you like to come back and do a project? I was like, I would love to, but I want to explore these discomforts I was feeling. And Mark Sloan was the director at the time, and he said, you can do whatever you want, but I just want you to be aware, don't tell us what to do and think. Don't come here and tell us how we should be. And I thought that was actually really good advice. As a newcomer coming in, you have to be careful. I said, okay, it's fair. And also for me, I always think of an artist as a person to ask questions, not answer questions, right? So the project became Cry Joy Park, Gardens of Dark and Light. Already I was thinking about making Paradise Interrupted. I did use a motif of black, I said earlier, because I've been working with ink at this point for when I did this was, when I did Paradise Interrupted, to about 10 years, just working with ink as the main medium. And we say in Chinese, ink has 5 colors. It can paint the tenderest bamboo shoot that's green in the spring, or it could be a 500-year-old pine tree that's old and craggly. So ink can express all these meanings, and it's also calligraphy. It has all these different possibilities. It's a combination of all colors. At the same time, it's the void of light. So this duality was super interesting to me, but I did not think of a black as oppressive, depressing or evil or anything like that. To me, it was enriching and pregnant with possibilities. But at the same time, working with this black color, I thought about the duality of the opposite of white. And also, when I was thinking about paradise, I was thinking about utopia, I started thinking about dystopia. So these kind of things, I think, as artists, we're working, when you explore an idea to the full, it turns kind of to the other direction. So this duality came into it. So I wanted to create a garden that's black and then a garden that's white, more for the aesthetic, formal qualities, but also what these things stood in society, in the larger society. So this project, Kaijoy Park, actually has traveled to around the world, several places, and each place, each time would take on a different local question or exploration. When I was in China, for example, in Beijing, I talked about labor inequalities, class differences, because we're supposedly a communist country, which meant there should be no difference in class. But obviously, that's not the case. If anyone knows anything about China, we have such disparity. So there's that. And then here, I want to talk about race. The first garden you come into is dark. It's actually divided at that wall right there. So when you first came in, that's a darker enclosure. But it's also very comforting, womb-like. A lot of people talked about being how protective they felt, and the shadows it created, you can see, is really beautiful. And there are lots of gold and silver colors in the foliage, so that created light. And then through a portal, I call this the botanical birth canal, you will walk through and you come to a light garden made from white paper. And the construction method is absolutely the same, but the way that it's installed is very different. And also here, there are these mechanical components. So this piece you see in the forefront. So in the dark garden, if you approach certain areas, it's motion censored, the garden will retract, it will recede. Whereas in the white garden, it's much more open, and one is extrovert, one is introvert, I would just say, that will come out and meet you. So these are some of the images. And to the space just adjacent to the other side, I created a dining room where the black and white gardens came together over this long table of 25 chairs. And we actually borrowed all the chairs from the local community. People brought I just said, wooden chairs, please bring different ones. So they're all quite different. It's coming together, and we went to thrift stores, bought all these different plates. So the place settings are all mismatched. Just the idea of like kind of community coming together. And this is the foliage. And this piece is called Invitation to the Feast. So what I was thinking about was that what it takes to build a paradise, how many hands and blood and sweat and tears it takes to build a paradise. But yet, when it's time for the harvest and feast, not everybody is necessarily invited to the table. And every society has had this problem, and I wanted to use Charleston, the people I knew here, the generosity of the people, to look at some of these things that were in our society. And this was the spring-summer season of 2019. So the project is called Invitation to the Feast. So a little bit leading up to it, for the opening, it was a very emotional opening. I had children in each corner. Okay. So there was when the Gilliard Opera House was being renovated, there were all these remains that were found in the grounds. And my friend, Dr. Ade Ofinian, on the lower right-hand corner, he was, who has passed away from cancer, unfortunately, a few years ago. He led the effort to identify the bones of these individuals, and then they were found to be of African descent, and they were in turn blessed with a new name that he presided over this naming ceremony, and then also they were then reinterred into the ground. And I know that now there's a whole memorial being built, so that really was led by his effort. So he was introduced to me through the friends at Halsey, and I was just forever grateful to have met him over a few years, but he really became a mentor to me in so many ways. So my opening, right after that, it was the naming ceremony of these individuals. So we were talking about this, like this is a new beginning, this is, I'm gonna do these dinners, it was gonna be a difficult project. So he said, I wanna give you a blessing. So what he did, I'll just jump ahead. So he brought all these different things that for the beginning of a child's life, for example, you would, in the Yoruba tradition, you would bless them with like honey, so they would let the child taste honey, and so their life will always be sweet. They'll give them salt, so their life will be always flavorful. It will be pepper, so their speech will be fiery, et cetera, et cetera. So there are all these different things that would bless a child with. And he said, this is a beginning of something. I want to bless this project. And then at the same time, I brought in a different tradition from my own culture, from a very beloved poet, Qu Yuan, from 2,500 years ago. He is one of the most beloved poets, and he had this beautiful poem called The Great Summon of the Souls. And this is no longer the practice in China, which I think is a pity, but apparently in the old days, is when a person first passes, when they're in the traditional family house in the courtyard, people will call from four sides of the courtyard or the house, and they will say, "O soul, come back, do not wander, do not go to the east. The east is full of treacherous water. Do not go to the north. North is full of ice and cold and bitterness. Do not go to the west. West is desert, desolate. Do not go to the south. It's full of poisonous snakes." These kind of things. Come back, O soul. Come back to where you're loved, to your own home. Look at the food we've laid out for you. Look at the people that love you. Look at, it goes on. It's a very long poem, but towards the end it says, come back, so we finish what we started. We go towards a wise man and finish what we started here. So I had these children that came from, stood on four sides. So it's kind of these coming together of things, of beginnings and ends. He gave me a blessing in a way. For me, it was in my own way, giving blessing, reciprocal blessing in that same way, in that he's doing a burial and I'm doing a new project. So that was just a really beautiful exchange that I felt that we were very connected in a very spiritual way in that regard. So once the show opened, we hosted, and I'm very grateful to the generosity of the Halsey and everybody who worked on that project, because it was hard, right? It was difficult to organize. So we did 4 luncheons and dinners. Every weekend I came back. On Saturday, we will have a public lunch in there, and then we'll have an invited catered dinner, very curated, in the evening. And each week we took on a topic that to me related to building a paradise and how do you divide the fruit of the labor. So one dinner was about, so we will print out the program, and each one had the theme. So this theme was on children. It's like, right, everything is like for the children. Everything we do is for the children, for the future. But how do we really look at that? So we looked at this lens through education. And I want to say that here I worked with who turned out to be a great friend, Jessica Boylston. Many of you guys probably know her. She was a local activist and dealt with a lot of these issues that I was interested in, that she was really my guiding hand in this and brought in a lot of the local people who are based here and was working on these topics on the ground. So here for the dinner table, I raised it by like 12 inches. We put them on risers, so the table came to your chest level. So I just want to put adults in, like, children's perspective. So each setting was a little different, and each dinner was thought of as a culinary experimentation too, because obviously Charleston has such a rich history of that, a current practice, not only history, but just culinarily speaking, so rich. So each one was designed by the executive chef of the college, and we had a lot of fun with that. So I think, for example, this one, he had his kids help him with the menu, like what they would like to eat, and it was very playful. And then this is for land, so I did actually put soil on the bought soil, so it's clean, but soil on the table. So, like, land issues from just banal things like you think, zoning and things like that, but housing. This becomes, it's like I was thinking, every ant, bug, creature has a right to lay down their head at night to sleep, right? We're like the only creatures on this world that the way we parcel our land is so uniquely human. So how did we get here? What are some of the issues that Charleston faces? And for each one, I also commissioned a locally based artist to collaborate, because I really wanted the evenings to be kind of like a feast, because there are a lot of local activists been working on this for years. I want them to be treated to a beautiful dinner. I want to connect them to have these conversations, but also have music. So this is Marcus Amaker. He's a musician and a poet. He's a poet laureate of Charleston for several years, and made an opera also earlier this year, so very accomplished artist. So he made music for us, and the first dinner we had spoken word. This is also land. This was a very difficult dinner. It was about re-entry into society after incarceration. Okay, people will go, why is that? Well, I was thinking, what if Adam and Eve were invited back to the Garden of Eden? Would they then be put upon a condition, or would they say, all is forgiven, come back? What is that like? How do we treat people when they've paid their debt? How do we treat them if they are to come back to society? And this was very, very difficult. This woman, she's the only one that didn't come from, not locally based. I did invite her from New York. She has worked with incarcerated folks for many years through a project called Dances Through Solidarity. So she works particularly with folks who have been in long-term solitary confinement. They would write scores with her to do these choreographed dances. So these folks would make the score, the dance score, inside their cell, 6x6 or 6x10. And then dancers outside would do these movements based on their score. So and this one particular individual she's been working with for some time had a piece called Dance Through Darkness. So she actually brought that in. We use that as an exercise for the lunch and dinner. And also we had this poet, Yvette Murray, there were several commissioned poetry that were recited during the dinners. And the last one was on food. So obviously that's more directly related to harvest, food desert, food distribution, and these issues that were discussed. And then we had one of the professors here at Charleston College, Kristen Annex Stance. Alexander, thank you. So her company, she made a brand new piece that was performed here during that dinner. So it was a very, very uncomfortable project for me. I'm just going to be very open about this. I'm going to just rest on this image of just reflection. I made the whole room with these old aging mirrors to kind of reflect back. And I don't know whether this kind of started a journey for me to go into more social practice work. I've always been interested in social practice, but I didn't know my own entry. And I actually don't think of these dinners as so much of artwork as programming, I would say, for me, because I didn't really know how to place intentionality there. So I'm just being kind of, and maybe later we can have a conversation about this too. And I didn't exactly know what these exploration would bring to me. At the beginning, I kind of spelled it out. I was like, it's about race. I did not know it was going to be about race, to be very open and frank with everyone. I just felt like something is really different in Charleston. Why is it different? And I was in New York, it's different. And then I did, right after Spoleto, I was in Atlanta doing a project, and Atlanta felt really different. And when I thought about it, to me, it was Charleston was just very segregated. I was like, but why is that? Why are there these issues? And when I started working with Jessica Boylston, who was the activist who's been working on this, she said it's because of systemic racism. And this is 2019, and I was not quite prepared to take that on, because this is before the pandemic and George Floyd. I was not quite ready. So I think I lacked some of the work that needed to address this. But when I did all this project, and then in 2020, everything, it would just seem like, well, yeah, of course. But I hadn't gone through that transformation yet, so I was just really on the ground, feeling it, experiencing it in the few months I was working on it. So I think for me, just being very open with everybody, I think I should have done more work ahead of the time. But at the same time, I did not understand that until I did it. But the way I just dealt with it was just be as open as I could, like I said, ask questions, not try to dictate anything, because I didn't. It was a journey for me. And I do hate to say this sometimes, because one of the activists I was working with, and she said, we don't want allies. We want accomplices in the drive-away car. Are you going to drive us away? And I was just like, I wasn't there at that moment, right? But I wanted to be. I wanted to be that. And sometimes you have to. She was like, if it's radical, it means really root changing. Go back to the word radical, what it means. It means to look at things from the root and change it from the very foundation. So I think it was just a really important lesson for me. And she also warned me. She was like, don't be one of those people that you do this and then you pat yourself on the back and said, I did my work. Now I'm okay now. Are you here if you're really here for the cause, you have to be really here for the cause, not just to do lip service to it. So I think I did take these lessons really deep to heart, and to really think about when an artist takes on a subject matter of importance of something like this, that you're not using it to advance just your art career, right? This is just me. This is me. I'm not here to. This is the lesson that I really took to heart. And that project has led me on such an incredible journey for the past few years, from 2019 to now, working with various projects. I've done a lot of oral history, recordings, and talking to folks, and really using people's voices. And this is also related to the opera too, right? Just using voices in such a profound way, the vibrational connection that we have one individual to the rest of us. So, okay. I want to read you this quote. As I come back to Charleston with the Foundation for Spirituality and the Arts. This is from a fellow artist. When you're approaching anything with your full attention, whether it is creating a painting or practicing compassion, whatever you're focusing on, It's a form of spiritual practice because it takes you away from your mind and your essence is focused. If you're concentrating, you're not roaming around. There's no monkey business. While I'm creating, I have no time to think badly about other beings. In this way, my art practice is like a spiritual practice. Asha Kama Wang Di, Bhutanese artist. You might know, Tyler, you might know him. I just found so much resonance to that. It is true that when you're channeling your energy for creativity, it's generative, right? There is only positivity that comes out of that. And that purity is aligned with, I think, what we search for when we're searching for spirituality. And I think that's why so many artists talks about the meditative process of art making, the cleansing, that you go through these soul-changing experiences when you're making art because you are having that focus and attention. Okay, I'm just gonna let this video play in the background. So for me, as I talked about 3 very public projects shared here, opera, doing these dinners and doing these very large installations, very immersive. It requires a lot of energy, outward energy. I've always had a very private practice of painting and drawing that starts from calligraphy. I am a little bit embarrassed. I'm not seeing a lot of Chinese people here, so I'm a terrible calligrapher. This is not good. In fact, many years ago, when I had a teacher in painting and drawing, painting and calligraphy, he actually told me, he was like, stop writing, this is terrible, just focus on painting. Because it was that bad. But he said, practice only your name so you can sign your name and not embarrass yourself. But I think he was wrong. I think my teacher was wrong. Because had I kept on writing, because this was in my early 20s, I would be a much better writer now, but I did stop. Until I picked it up about 15 years ago, I just started writing. The way I write calligraphy is a little bit different. Typically you will follow a master style. You will follow this style, you will write it, you will follow their, these books you can buy, you can follow their writing. And then once you mastered one school, then you move on to another one. You usually start with very carefully, more formal writing to the more running scripts and things like that as you become more accomplished. I have no patience for that. And also, I'm never going to show this work in calligraphy. So what I do is I come upon a word, sometimes one word or one phrase, and I write that for a long time. So the top scroll is only a very short segment of a very, very long scroll. And it's from the I Ching. It's telling you to cultivate day and night. Then maybe you don't do anything wrong. The bottom one is a poem from a Tang Dynasty poet that says, travel to the end of the water. Travel to where the water is exhausted. Sit and watch the cloud rise. So it's the idea of like, you've exhausted something, but then it takes another form, like water turns into cloud and evaporates. So these were different periods of my life. So the top writing is slightly better because that's from later. The bottom is particularly not good. But I find these words and I just go and find my favorite calligraphers from history. I have this big, thick calligraphy dictionary. I find the prettiest words to my eye, I photocopy it, I make it, and I just write that until I'm satisfied. Until I said either another phrase takes over. I guess it's like a mantra, right? It becomes a mantra. And that could occupy me sometimes months, but sometimes years. I have written some words for, like one word, the word exhaustive or impoverished. depends on how it's used. I think I wrote that one word for 3 years, just the same word over and over again, just because I felt that's kind of where I was. So I've always had this practice. I felt it was very private. It's something I do daily or weekly. Sometimes I don't get to it for months because life is so busy, work is so busy. But if I can, if I'm home for a period of time, I do that every day. And the program director from the foundation, Lisa Amati, she's a longtime friend, a curator based in New York. She came for a studio visit, and I just happened to have these around, and she looked at them. She was like, I was explaining it as, this is the source of my, this is the source of my well. This is my well, where I draw, replenish myself from. This is where I go back and find rejuvenation, refuge. This is where I go. That enables me to do the public things because it's so immediate, because calligraphy is all about the energy, right? It's that transfer energy, is your breath. That's why you have to hold the brush a certain way. You have to focus. So that's why it's very helpful for me to just have one word or one phrase I'm focusing on. Then it's just of that energy transferring from your body and immediately onto that paper. So how you feel is in every stroke, in every quiver or confidence or whatever that might be. It's completely immediate. And then she was like, so she basically invited me to come to the residency, which is so generous, 6 weeks, beautiful Charleston, have a space. And she was like, you can do that. So here I am in my studio with a brand new scroll. It's 100 meters long. So it's 100 yards. And I'm starting a new word or phrase, which I have decided since arriving here. And I'm also challenged to think about how to bring this very, very private, personal practice and maybe merging it with the more community-oriented work I've done. I don't know how that will go, but I think that's a good place to be, to not know and just ask questions and not know what the answer will be and just find out together. So I am going to hold some open studios times. I invite all of you, any of you, maybe one or two at a time, not at the same time, but if you're interested, come talk to me afterwards. I will invite you for a time for us to sit together, drink a cup of tea. Maybe we'll make a drawing together. Maybe you give me some energy I put on the paper. Maybe you can put something directly onto the paper. I do have a place where we can start, so you don't have to be. For artists, just come and we can see what we do. But for any of you, you're like, oh, I don't know, I can't draw. I have something to start, so that won't be scary. We'll start somewhere, and we'll see where this collectively takes us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. This is a lot. You're so productive. You're such a productive and prolific artist. I have a lot of questions. Do you want me to start, Tyler, or do you want to start?
Yeah, you can sure start.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we were trying to maybe flesh out some of the spiritual issues that she was talking about in her work.
And so in that vein of spirituality, and I was thinking about, what we had talked about in advance of your talk, and it was this place, Charleston, and what Charleston has been for you. But I was so struck by, in your talk, you were talking about place, but you were talking a lot about people. And the people who were telling you about the place, and the people who were forming these experiences with you and for you, and in your new project, which is so exciting. I hope everyone might look into it. Is also involving people, And so bringing in that spiritual realm of connecting with another person, and your interest in social practice art where you bring other people in as collaborators. I wonder if you can speak to that spiritual side of working, bringing another person into this very intimate process.
That's amazing. That was my
Oh,
first
no.
question as well. So I think we're all aligned in some way. Like, how does this daily or regular practice that you have, which has a spiritual component, how does that also carry over in terms of your social practice? Because sometimes people behave very differently in their private meditations from the way they actually interact with people.
The short answer is I don't know. We'll see. But it's interesting that you said that I talk about place and people, but I'm really talking about people. I think it's true. I mean, obviously, the beauty of Charleston is what struck me first. You know, the first few times I came, I was just enthralled with all of that. But really what made it impact is definitely the people. I think art is a way of communion, some way of with other human beings. I don't think of art in general as objects, as paintings, but I think of it as that exchange you have in someone's, like you make a work, you have something, you put that energy out there, that vibration. If someone feels that vibration through this work and that resonance, that kind of shift, that click in their heart, or whatever that is, I think that's where the work is. So it is kind of a communal, it's communal and it's also communion. So one thing, but the way I think also the way Tyler phrased it, I think was interesting, just bring it in, this particular one, because typically my other social practice, more like work, are with groups of people, right? Or with volunteers, or when I'm working on big installations, I work with a lot of people, but in group. But this at the foundation is going to be one-on-one. But recently I did a lot of oral history. That's very one-on-one. So I think that informed this too. But I hadn't really linked them together because I'm in the middle of it. So I'm a little nervous, but also very excited. So if you guys are nervous, I'm nervous with you, so we're good. So I hope someone will break the ice afterwards, come see me, and we'll just try it together.
Okay, well, I guess along those lines, I think it's interesting. Artists often feel very at ease talking about the sort of socio-political motivations or goals of their work, or the actions they want to inspire or to curate to a certain degree. Sometimes it's more difficult talking about the sort of the spiritual motivations. Why do you think that is? Is it because it's less formulated in your own mind, or is it something that is often felt to be a private matter, or it's somehow disconnected from the action?
I think it's all that what you said, but also it's just really hard to talk about it. It's like spirituality and religion is not dinner table conversation. It's the same, you know? In the art world, I think the art world reflects the real world, right? Whatever we find it difficult to deal with, we try to kind of mediate it. I do feel that, at least amongst my artist friends, and who are really friends, right? Friends even more first rather than colleagues, that we know each other as colleagues, that is a conversation we would have. But even in that way, you have to speak very carefully, because I think the world is contentious. You have to be careful how you say it. You don't want to alienate people. And also, we're just kind of in the practice of we're not versed in describing our work in that way. And there's I feel like it's almost like beauty is almost a dirty word in contemporary art, so is religion, no?
Are any of your peers interested in pushing back against that, or are you in some way, or when you think about sharing the essence, the spirit that that you're revealing, are you thinking through that very carefully? Because you talked very frankly about entering into a project without maybe being ready for it. And do you feel that that experience has now given over, do you feel that that experience has now informed how you might think through some of these issues when you're sharing such intimate thoughts and inspirations with the greater public?
Well, I think, first of all, my spiritual practice grounds me, right? That's the first and I think most important thing. And then when it grounds me, it allows me to make meaningful work. For me, it makes me able to have longevity, to have sustainability in my practice. I think that's the first and foremost important. And in terms of my particular spirituality, I think it would be better if we were just more free and less tabooed about any topic, for sure. Even beauty, I am totally for beauty, and that's not something talked about so much in contemporary art, honestly. And there's all kinds of categorizations. So I think just being to be open to talk about it, your practice, what you do, but obviously always understand that there are individual practices. The way we talk about it is to allow others to talk about it so that we can have an open conversation, right? About anything, about religion, about spirituality, about social economic problems, about racial, about LGBTQ, about immigration, any of those. I think they should be all up there. Is that a cop-out answer?
No.
I think that really relates to my thoughts on the way you were talking about your work here, which I felt really a sense of kind of empathetic, almost humility in the way you were speaking about your work, but it was a way that I felt a kind of sense of emotion from the way you were talking about it, which is often different from some artist talks we've been to that are maybe there's a veil of jargon or other kinds of accepted ways of talking. I was just wondering, maybe just this exercise of looking back at your work through this spiritual lens, did you get a different perspective on the work, or was it a sense that you were already thinking about these ideas when you were making them, or is it only retrospectively that you kind of made these connections?
I think in an earlier conversation together, I had said that I am a spiritual nomad. Currently, I'm in the wilderness right now. I had periods in my life I felt more sure about my allegiance in terms of, ideas and being adhered to a structure. Right now, in the last few years, I'm definitely searching and trying to understand what that means for me. And looking at these works, I really see that. I see that reflection. Just that intense search, like Paradise Interrupted, right? I mean, I use really, the Garden of Eden was on my mind the whole time. And the idea of what does that mean? What does that promise? What is it that we have inherited? Where do we go from here? That is definitely is reflective, that search the protagonist went on this spiritual journey. I made it for Tianyi. She was my muse. But I also understood it at some point, it was from myself. I was looking for that too.
Were there other times in your life where you felt you were really very focused on a particular way of thinking and being, and did that sort of have a different effect on your work than being sort of more of an open, hopeful nomad, maybe?
I think different times in your life, certain things are said and others are open. You know what I mean? Sometimes you can't have everything questioning. I mean, that would just be like a cup of water without a cup. You'll just be everywhere. So you kind of have to have some structure, but then you have an opening so you can drink from it. So I think it's like that. You need to have some structure, but be open. Otherwise, you can't take from it.
That was the most beautiful on-the-fly metaphor I've ever heard. Like Tyler, I'm very inspired by your humility, your openness, especially talking about your experience coming for your Halsey exhibition, and I was so struck by that, and thank you for sharing that. I think it's important for people to hear because I can't say people. I understand what it's like to feel nervous about admitting I made this misstep, or I am always encouraging students to be open about what they don't know, because or else they're closing themselves off to learning something new. And as a professor, I'm curious how that experience and what you were talking about tonight, has informed how you teach the next generation of creatives. How do you talk to them about being open to new experiences and connections?
So I teach MFA program in New York. I'm a mentor in the program, so I take students, young artists, I take them not just for one semester, minimum 1 year. Sometimes they take me for 2. So I kind of watch out for them for the course of their career there. And the first thing I say, I'm not here to teach. I'm here to mentor. We're artists. We're fellow artists. I just have a little bit more experience than you. And I think I do it, ask them to be open through demonstrating, because it's all about understanding who they are at first. I think being a good teacher of studio art is not easy, because once you get through the foundational things, which, at this point, we don't talk a lot about technical things. It's really about what kind of artist do you want to be? What kind of work do you want to make? How can you be the best version of that? How can you push yourself further? So if you don't know who they are, you can't help them. So my first few classes, the whole effort is just to understand who they are as individuals and where they want to be. And I think when I can demonstrate that and share my own experience of being open, I think through demonstration, right? There's not so much like imparting knowledge at that level.
I have one last question. I know there are students and artists in this space tonight, and I use the word prolific because we've got opera, we've got installation, we've got everything, calligraphy, painting, drawing, probably things I don't know about. And, how do you navigate taking on a brand new media? Like you talked about not having done an opera, and you did talk about that, but how do you start down that path? What does it look like? What's the light that you're searching for? And I just wondered if you could speak to that.
Yeah. So I kind of take on long-term research projects. Sometimes it's years before it becomes something. I just jumped into Paradise Interrupted, but I actually had probably 3 shows before that. I dealt with that. So I was involved in a show called World Inside Out, and the curator asked us to think about mythologies, or so I used Garden of Eden. That was in 2012 or something. So I was already on that, thinking about that, and I made a giant drawing called In Search of Garden of Eden. So what I'm trying to say is I use every opportunity. If I have an idea, I just use every opportunity I have, a project, an exhibition, a workshop, a residency, to do something about that and just be open and see where it goes. And that could be that, or it could lead to something else. For example, I end up not using any kind of drawing for the opera, and that's okay, but that drawing was very important to me at that point. I was thinking about, working out these ideas, like, In Search of the Garden of Eden. I was actually looking at geographical locations and things like that. So I think just being open and talk to a lot of people, talk to peers. So right now I'm thinking about, again, a time-based work, but very different from the opera. So anytime I hear, oh, composers, musicians, I'm like, oh, what do you do? Like just talk to new people, like be curious, learn about their practice, and then all of a sudden go, oh, I love that. Can I learn more about that? You just never know where it's going to take you. Because if I hadn't met Tianyi, I would not have made that opera. I might have made something else that would be completely different. So it takes that spark, right? So just be open, just be curious. I would say be curious and not be afraid to fail. Just try it.
A fantastic mantra for all of us. Thank you. I'd like to open up to questions from the audience. I'm going to bring you the mic so that we can all hear and learn from your question. And as Jennifer has encouraged you, be open, be curious, be adventurous. I'm still very curious. Katie, yeah. Katie Mixon's gonna inspire us all.
You kind of spoke around this briefly. I was just wondering, going forward now as you're working on bringing individuals into your studio and sort of maybe more performative drawing practice, what questions are currently guiding your research as you're doing something maybe a little more intimate and personal that isn't so mythological or based in history?
Yes, I have a very personal topic I'm on. I just entered perimenopause. Woo. It's gonna make some of you are gonna be like, oh, I understand. The rest of you are gonna be very uncomfortable in the next 3 minutes. But it's been a very difficult time, and I turned 50 last summer, and it was immediately after I turned 50. I turned 50 in June, and July, my world just fell apart. I had no idea what was happening, and it took me months to figure out, oh, this is what's happening. And I was in therapy for a whole year, you guys, preparing for 50. I don't usually put a lot of stock in numbers, but I knew 50 was going to be kind of a big deal, and if I didn't properly deal with it, I didn't want to be caught unawares. So I was in a good place psychologically. And then my body started falling apart. I didn't know what was happening. Okay, so my current personal search is my energy is different. I can't, okay, another thing, I've always had young assistants. I keep getting older, they stay the same. They go from 25 to 35. By the time they're 35, they leave. So I've always had the same age assistants. No one's ever been able to outperform me. I'm always staying later than them, just that tenacity, all of that. I can't do that anymore. I feel it for the first time this past year when I'm working on installations and things. I just feel like, oh, I understand how they felt, because my mind would still be going, and my body was just like, I can't do what you're asking. So all that to say, facing this new phase, what do I need to do to take care of myself, my body, and my spirit so I can be smarter about it, I can be kinder, and I can be as creative and generative and make even better work in the next, 30 years, maybe, I think. There's so many artists that make great work from 50 to 80, right? So 90. I just saw this great Louise Bourgeois show in Tokyo. So I know she make amazing drawings a year of her death, amazing drawings. So I know it's possible. I want to understand that. I want to crack that code. And that is what these drawings are about for me right now, this current drawing I'm about to start.
You mentioned a lot of your impetus for exploration came from some deep inner sense, discomfort, uncomfortable, and that sort of began the journey of being curious and softening inhibitors in that exploration. So I guess I'm asking you, what is the role of that knowing, that body knowing, that, you know, we cut off sometimes with the flatness of so much art?
That's a really good question. I have found in my life, it is sometimes easier for me to deal with certain things through art than through dealing with it straight in my life. So I've made art about, there's so many ways I can talk about this. And it goes back to what Tyler said earlier about mediating and not want to talk about certain things. Okay, so jargon. I know how to do the art jargon. I know how to talk about, you know, when I painted landscape with black ink, it's about making landscape painting from 2-dimension to 3-dimension, and then when green grows into it, it's 4 dimensions, art history, is blah, blah, all this. I can talk about that all day. I can be in a museum talk and just focus on that. And the form, and then borrowing from this master and that. Okay, I can do that. But what I don't normally talk about is how I started that was because I went through a really profound period of depression. I could not get up every day. Every day I woke up just thinking, the first thought came to me was like, shit, I'm alive. That's the first thought. And I didn't have the courage to self-harm in a devastating way, but I was just wishing I didn't wake up in the morning. And everything was black. I could not shake it, so I want to paint everything black. But I've talked about it a little bit here and there, but I don't normally talk about that. I've talked about making installations about destructive and generative energies and how they come together. I talk about this, like disharmony and harmony. What I don't say is that, well, I had a tumor that was cancer, and I had to go through this treatment, and I was thinking about, and it was in my uterus, and this supposedly generative place, how can it have this, and what's the creative output? Can you have creative output out of something so negative? So there's that already. But I think art has helped me process that, very difficult things. So with the black painting on plants, when I did my first project, when I painted this landscape in Japan, all black with ink, I thought the plants would die, because how can they not die, right? But these were weeds, they were always going to be cut for the exhibition. So I said, don't cut the weeds, I'll paint them black, blah, 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 blah. And to my surprise, after it rained, the next day I came back, it grew this much. The center of the plant grew this much. At the end we took us 10 days to paint the landscape. At the last day, I had to go back and repaint all the centers, just so the opening would be all black. And then it showed me, oh, this is a resilience of life. Even a grass has that. How can I not? So about spirituality, maybe I didn't find it in my own personal belief in that moment, but through nature, through art, it gave back to me. So it was healing, and I did it for many years because every time I needed it. So I don't know, somewhat kind of addressing, I think art has taught me so much because I try to be open to it. And because it has taught me, I hope that now that I'm in my 5th decade, I have a little bit more wisdom. And that wisdom, I love what you said about softening. I love that. When you have that resistance and discomforting, like soften to it and being more open. So. Oh, Petit.
Hi, Jennifer. I was here when you came in 2019, and I am curious to ground you back in Charleston because at that time, all of those conversations that you had were very, it was an emotional time in Charleston, a very emotional time, and I think people were just trying to figure stuff out. But as someone who was coming from up north, coming to the south, and you mentioned there was a lot of things you learned while you got here, and you were like, wow, I didn't prepare myself for this. But we wouldn't have known that because of the way that your work spoke for, regardless of where you were, it spoke to us. Like that, your exhibition was so moving to me. But one of the things I would love to ask you at this time, with as much wisdom as you have now that you're sharing at where you are in your chapter of your life right now, if you could go back to the person that you were then that came to Charleston and you were able to see her face to face, what would you give her or tell her now?
I think on the face, I would say be more patient, be more open, and learn more before I came to these tables. But at the same time, I was already learning so much. I was so brimmed to the full that I don't know. I think I had to be thrown into the trenches. I have to say, I don't know what could prepare one for those hard lessons, because they're just hard, right? So I don't know, because I would not want, it was super hard for me. I felt like whiplash, like every time we had one of these, I was just like, oh, what am I doing? Am I doing the right thing? But going on, but just hold grace for yourself and for others. And that's something I heard then. I didn't understand what that meant. And I didn't understand for a long time. I don't think I understood until this year what that meant, to have that grace. But I think that would be it, because I don't think there's any other way to learn. Yes. Okay. We'll get you after this one. And this lady after, because she yeah.
Mine's kind of an entirely different question, but for the gardens work that you did, what made you decide to do that out of paper, and like how long did that take you?
So right before that, I was painting live plants black with ink. So I want to create a black garden because I was really on this idea of like a surrealist garden. Black, I said earlier, it's like meaning of all things and all that. But on theater, stage of theater, you can't have live plants and you have to water them and all of this. It will never tour. So I was thinking about other ways. And I was looking at Chinese Kun opera. It's very highly, highly abstract. So they would just have, the stage would be quite bare. Everything is suggested through dance and movement. So I had this idea like it would be like a long scroll. That's another reason why I love scrolls. Because I can bring 100 meters, but it would just roll up into a tube, and I can just take it with me. So I thought, something that would just roll out, and then can close up. So I thought, paper. But then I didn't want to just do a drop, like just, because that's obviously it's a theater device. I wanted to be full-bodied and just gnarly and all of this. So it's kind of let me so that's a long time. That took, like a whole year or more, year and a half to figure this out. And I just did models, I did accordion folds, and then I did honeycomb. I did a bunch of different things until I came to figure out how to do this. Basically, like I kind of invented a way. It's actually being, hopefully, it's being, what do you call it? Not copyright, but trademark, registered, patented. That's what it is. Yeah. So it's kind of out of necessity. So it's like, that's the mother of all inventions, right? To close up, so that whole stage, 10 feet tall, it just, the whole garden falls down to like this thick. And for this installation, it just packed down to a few crates. So I can travel around the world with it too.
We'll have one last
Okay, this lady here,
question. Yes.
I just wondered, basically, life is a struggle with failure. And artists spend a lot of time struggling with failure. And And a lot of spiritual literature always sounds alike, depending, it doesn't really matter what religion it is. So what are the actual kind of techniques, that you use to deal with depression, lack of energy, all the obstacles you come across in life? I mean, there is stuff in the spiritual literature about how you deal with it, but how do you, as an individual, what have you put together?
I have a therapist. I have a leadership coach that helped me in professional life. I have 2 cats. I have my meditation and my mantras. I have a morning mantra. I have meditation. I have sitting meditation. I also have activity meditation, things I do that's not just sitting. I have a wonderful boyfriend, and I have art, and I have friends, right? So I think I have created, because depression is one of those things that it doesn't go away. You just learn how to deal with it. So it's not as intense, it's not as long, and it's not as maybe hopefully destructive. So I can catch them sooner when I feel myself going into a depressive state. So I have a lot of guardrails that doesn't let me go as far. And then also that allows me to relate to other people that, when they have struggles and when you can talk to them, friends are really helpful too. And drawing and painting. If I don't draw for a while, I'm a total bitch. So that's just to say.
Well, best closing line to a talk. I want to thank Jennifer Wen Ma so much for coming and being so incredibly vulnerable, so incredibly inspiring. I can't wait to see what happens with your residency. Thank you so much to Foundation for Spirituality and the Arts and Tyler Rollins. Let's all go and be curious. Thank you so much to you.